started whenever you're ready, Dr. Griffith.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let's see here. All right. So it's a little bit different because I cannot see. I'm the only face that I'm seeing. I'm not seeing anybody else. So let's see here. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe you guys have your webcams off. I'm not sure, but it definitely feels weird to not see any faces. But I want to welcome you all to, I know 3 of you are here so far, to this workshop where we're going to focus on writing a literature review and how to really format and formulate your literature review, whether it's for a thesis or a dissertation. So that's what we will be unpacking today as I go through. So like I said earlier, please interrupt me if you have questions. I prefer to take the questions throughout, then all at the end. So please feel free to go ahead and jump in whenever you need to ask me a question. So this is my agenda for us today. We have about an hour and 15 minutes. So this is what I have planned for us. I'll tell you a little bit about me. We'll talk about what each of you, it's a small group, so hopefully we will get everyone to chime in, what you hope to get out of the workshop. And then I will go into the specifics of how to write an introduction and a literature review. And we will be doing an activity throughout the entire workshop to give you some practice in doing so. And then we'll end with some takeaways, so some things that you learned, and any last minute questions or comments that you have. So, all right, so just a little bit about me. Some of you are familiar with me. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Education and Human Development. I'm in the counseling department. I'm also a research fellow for the Consortium for Family Strengthening Research, which is a multi-university group. I am a part of it. We have professors who are University of South Carolina, Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia Tech. So a lot of us from different universities across the U.S. And we work together to do innovative, externally funded research. Most of the scholarship that I'm involved in is focused around issues of family and relational health. And we also do mentorship of doctoral students and mentorship of people like me who are junior faculty. My particular line of research centers around looking at the impact or the influence of adverse childhood experiences on outcomes in terms of family health and adult relationship health, particularly for populations who are historically marginalized and underserved. As well as looking at the efficacy or effectiveness of healthy fatherhood and relationship education programming in reducing recidivism rates and mass incarceration, as well as increasing family stability, specifically among minoritized fathers. That is basically the type of research that I'm involved in and the type of research that I do. So a lot of the examples that you'll see me use throughout the workshop will be centered around those topics. So even though it may not be what your line of research is, I'll use those types of examples to explain it, and I'll be encouraging you to think about what your own area of research is and how you would come up with how to write your literature review. So that's a little bit about me. Let's see. So let's start off just briefly. I want to hear from each of you, and again, it's a small workshop, so each person should be able to chime in. You know, what are you hoping to get out of this workshop?
Hi, Dr. Griffith. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ashley.
Hi. I'm not sure if I should use the chat box or if I can unmute my mic.
Yeah, talking would be better. It's easier for me to navigate in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one of the things that I hope to get out of the workshop is that when it comes to lit reviews, I tend to get lost in the overwhelming amounts of articles and information. So I'm just kind of hoping to learn a bit more about how to kind of organize and structure literature reviews.
Perfect. Yes, we will definitely be talking about that. All right. What about someone else? What do you hope to get out of the workshop?
Hi, my name is Monisha. So I am currently in the process of doing my literature review and introduction, and yeah, it's just feeling a little bit lost and trying to figure out how to organize myself and, properly do the lit review so the introduction just kind of flows.
Yeah, makes sense. You'll definitely be able to get something from today's workshop.
Awesome.
Dr. Chris, this is Yun Zhang. So, well, we just had an assignment about the literature review. So I was kind of the same situation as two other fellows. I was totally, I even didn't know where to start. So when I saw this opportunity, I was okay, I'm gonna jump in.
Good. What about you, Vedika?
Hey, are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm in my first semester of my doctoral program, so I don't really have much idea about the literature review, but I will be starting to have my advisor with her research, so I'm going to help her in the literature review part, so I just want to get some insight on how to begin and how to organize, just like others, yeah.
All right, sounds good. And so far it seems that what each of you wants to get out of it, I addressed that in some shape or form. So again, I hope it's helpful for you. But we will be going through really how to set this thing up, right? How to get it done, how to start, and how to finish it, right? Because it can be a very overwhelming task if you're not streamlining your process. So I always start off when I talk about this. I think this is the part that students hate most when I say you got to read, and read some more, right? So this kind of aligns with what Ashley said about this, the magnitude of articles and the things that you have to read. And, for those of you who are more familiar with me, I'm a straight shooter. I'm very direct. So I don't sell dreams. And what I mean by that is there's no way to work around the fact that you have to submerge yourself in the reading. There is no way to get out of that. The more effort that you make to try to find shortcuts out of the reading, the longer the process is going to take you, right? So really, the fact is that you do have to continuously be reading about whatever that topic or issue may be. Now, there is a targeted way that you can read so that it's a good use of your time. So we'll talk about that as I go through, but I just wanted to start off from the forefront, letting you know that unfortunately, to write an introduction and to write a literature review, you do have to do an extensive amount of reading. Because it's really important for you to do a thorough review of the literature on whatever the identified topic is. You have to know what's already out there about your topic, right? And because ideally, when you're writing an introduction or you're writing a literature review, you're telling a story. What is the narrative? What is the story about whatever this problem or issue or whatever it may be? What exactly is the story behind all of that? Because your reader, right? So whether that is your thesis committee, your dissertation committee, or someone who's reading your article, the literature review is what really helps the reader understand your topic, right? And so to understand the topic, you need the writer, which is you. You really need to put really need to put together a well-founded narrative and story. So your reader could not only understand the topic, but also understand the need for your study. Why is this study necessary? That is what you're quote unquote selling in your literature review. You're giving the story, you're giving the narrative, and then you're ending that narrative with, and this is why my study is important. This is why my study is needed. That is the purpose of a literature review, to tell the story and to make a case for the need for what you are about to do.
That's great. So
yes?
Here, then because I think before you start reading, actually there is another process you need to have, like, so how you're going to choose your articles, right? When you have this topic in front of you, even though it's so detailed. But when you search on the library or Google Scholar or whatever resources, it will come out thousands of them. How you're gonna choose? What are you gonna choose to read?
And so you have to be a critical reader in your research, right? So sometimes with a particular topic, there might be seminal studies related to that topic, which will be older studies, right? But they're groundbreaking studies on that topic. So you definitely want to make sure that you read those seminal works. Then you want to read, look to see kind of the progression of the research in that area. Was a lot of it published in the 90s, in the early 2000s? What has been the progression of the study? And once you start reading, you're going to see the overlap. You're going to see the themes recurring in the research that you read, or what's new being added, right? So yeah, you're right. Sometimes thousands of things might come up. You're not going to be able to read all of that, but going through and skimming, okay, which ones should I look at that might incorporate previous studies? So let's, for example, if I decided to read an article that was published in 2010, right, 10 years ago, chances are that article is going to, if it's a good article, it's going to reference what has been done prior. What that study is going to do. So there is a strategic way to look at the literature, look at the years of publication, and I always suggest starting with the recent ones first to see where is this topic at currently, and those, if they're good articles, they are going to mention seminal studies, groundbreaking studies, and so you have to make sure you read those. So a good example, I'll use my own, is, so I talked before about my area of study being adverse childhood experiences. The seminal study for that was done in the 1990s. The publication came out in 1998. There have been tons of studies on that topic since then, but I needed to go back and read those seminal, groundbreaking studies that really put that topic on the map, right? So if you're reading recent stuff, it is going to direct you to the seminal main studies, because you'll see those studies being referenced multiple times. So that is a cue. Okay, I need to look up those original works, right? And the key thing, another key thing that you have to have in mind that comes from reading, before you even start your literature review, you have to have the end in mind. Where do I want my story to end? So think about an author, right? They plan out their book, they plan out their story before they even begin writing, right? They know where they want the story to begin, they know where they want their story to end. They might still be a little bit hazy on what the middle is going to look like, but they have that beginning point and they have the end point, right? And most times have the end point. What am I going to do? How am I going to write this book so it ends up here? That's very similar with a literature review. Before you start writing, you should have in mind how is my story going to end? And then you work backwards, right? So having the end in mind before you even start writing. I think that's a mistake that a lot of students make. They just figure, let me just start writing and I'll take it on as I go along. That's when you find yourself spinning in circles because you don't even know where you're planning to end. Have your end in mind, and your end is usually the point that you're making about the need for your study. And then once you have that established, you work your way back. Okay, what story do I need to tell so that this need stands out by the time the reader gets to the end? But you have to know what the end is. You have to have the end in mind, okay? And so I have a reference there, and I think some of you, I know Ashley is, and Yin Yin, that are in the counseling department, and the reference there is for a book particularly about writing dissertations, particularly for the counseling field. So if those of you that are interested in looking up that book, you can look it up. And for those of you who are not, it can still give you an outline for how you can go about writing, even if counseling is not your field. So like I said before, oh, why is this so big? Okay, let's see. So now you're ready to start, right? So you have to fully understand what is the problem I'm trying to research? What's the issue that I'm trying to learn more about? What is the issue or problem that my research is going to address? And so news alerts, right? You're going to know that by reading, and then reading some more, right? We cannot escape the task of reading, right? And because you cannot understand the magnitude or the scope or the depth or really even thoroughly understand the problem or the issue that you're trying to learn about without you fully understanding it yourself. And you can't understand it without reading, right? So this is where we'll start to break down. So to go back to Union's example or question earlier, and even Ashley talking about, okay, how am I reading? How am I even beginning to do this, right? When you are developing your narrative, your story, you can think about it in different categories, right? So the first category we're going to talk about is the what I call the pain of the problem. What I mean by that is, why does your research matter? Why is it necessary? Why do we, and by we it can mean the reader, the profession, society, the nation, whoever the we is, why do we need to know about this issue or problem? What's the impact of the problem? Who does this problem affect? Right? When you think about that, you're thinking about the pain of the problem, right? The significance of the research. What are the social implications for this issue and problem? What's the national significance? What's the significance to the profession, whatever profession that you're in? So those things is what helps you identify the pain of whatever the problem is. And again, you're going to get that from reading articles, books, or whatever based on whatever that topic might be, right? So here, and you'll see it in articles that you read, this is where you read a lot about, you see statistics being mentioned, prevalence rates, those sorts of things, right? So an example I have on there is, high rates of unwed childbearing rates among specific populations. When you have high rates of unwed single parents or unwed childbearing rates, that puts strain on social services. It puts strains on Medicaid, Medicare, things like TANF, things to benefit or to support low-income populations, right? So you can look at high rates of a certain thing has implications in other areas, right? Mass incarceration and recidivism rates, right? We know those are very high. United States has the highest rate of incarceration across the world. What are the implications of that, right? Broken families, right? High-risk people going in and out of jail, right? Reoffending. So there are all these implications that come out of this problem with high rates of occurrence, right? Chronic unemployment. Chronic unemployment can lead to, again, broken families, higher crime rates, right? A lot of weight on social support services, right? So you really have to think about, what is the pain of this issue that I am looking at or I'm wanting to learn about? Does that make sense? Who has questions about what the pain of a study is or the pain of a problem is? Okay, so what I want you to do, Sophia should have emailed everyone a review sheet, a practice sheet. Does everyone have that? I only have
Yes.
Yes, Union, we all feel that pain. Does everyone have the handout sheet?
Yes.
Okay, so everyone pull up their sheet, and I'm going to share it on the screen. See here. So it's loading. Give it a minute. All right, so this is what we're going to use to actively work through our workshop. So what I want each of you to think about, and I'll put back up the PowerPoint, is, let's see here. So now we're going to be focusing on that first block, right? The pain. So I want you to be thinking about what is the problem or issue you are interested in terms of your research. And use these questions, use these examples to jot down in that first block, what do you think are some of the pains of the problem that you are wanting to research? So write in that block your thoughts about, based on what you know so far about that topic, why it matters, why it's necessary, why do people need to know, what's the impact of it, who is it impacting, what's the significance that it has. And if you've been reading and you already know that you have some stats or some prevalence rates of whatever it might be, go ahead and take some notes in that first block. I'll give you some time to do that. And I really want to encourage you to actually write it out, put it in there. Let's use that handout as we go through, and I'll be asking you to share some of the things that you're writing down. So take some time to do that.
Excuse me, Dr. Curtis? Sorry, I had to step away real quick. So right now we're coming up with an example for the first box, the pain is
You're
a problem.
trying to unpack the pain. So use these question prompts on this slide to help you think about what are some of the pains of the problem that you're trying to, and just kind of take some notes in that first block.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, to take about 2 more minutes and wrap up what you've written down so far. All right, who wants to share some of what they jotted down in that first block about the pain of the problem or the issue that they want to research? Who wants to share?
I can go first. So the topic would be about whether or not counselors in training practice sufficient self-care. And so the importance of that is because of their profession, they're engaged in helping other individuals. And if they're not taking sufficient care of themselves, then there's a risk of unintentionally doing harm to the clients or negatively impacting the treatment. So that's what I have right now.
Mm-hmm. So what you want, and that's an example of too when you're reading, because what I'll use Ashley's own as an example, that is a well-established problem. That's not something that's new. We've known that for years, right? In this field of counseling, this idea of self-care and the importance of it. So Ashley, part of what you will need to do as you're figuring out what that is, what new? What are you adding to the, what is going to be the professional significance of that? Because as a profession, they will say, well, that we know that. We've known that for years, right? So that is an example of as you're working through your topic, when you identify your pain and the significance of it, you really have to think about why is this significant? And part of how you can do that is, how is this new? What is this going to add to the profession? And that's going to be key, right? Because you don't want someone to pick up your article and say there was nothing new here that we haven't known for 20 years, right? So,
right.
So you really have, that's why I have there with the significance of the research, which also means about, again, what's new, right? What are you adding to that? So yes, the problem is real. Maybe you think about what are the specific things that we do to make that a priority. You have to find your new twist to whatever it is, okay? All right, what about one more person that can add to this?
I will go.
Okay.
So my topic was focusing on the spouses of F1 international students. So I'm not sure if you learn about anything, anything about like F1 visa. So because of this, I cannot see this. Anyway, so the recent policy from the government towards international students, it's actually very stressful for us. Well, but there is another group of population which actually is very invisible from the public. It's the spouses of F1 international students. Mm-hmm. So they come here, then if they couldn't speak the English, it would be worse for their social well-being and psychological well-being. Mm-hmm. And especially with COVID, so, and also the policy towards international students, of course, it will have a more adverse effect on the spouse as well. But it never received attention.
So that again, another example of when you are teasing out that idea, right? When you're trying to make sense of it on all the different levels, you have to be reading about or decide about why does that matter? Why does that matter on a national level? Why does that matter on a professional level? Maybe you're looking at the spouses of one student or whatever in a particular field. You know, you have to decide what exactly it is that you're looking at, because that is another thing that causes an issue too. When it's too broad and you're all over the place, right, in what you're looking at. So you really have to file that down to something that is very specific about exactly what you're looking at, and why does looking at that specifically matter? Why is it necessary? Right? Okay. Because another thing we have to think about too, and I see this a lot with students, and I'm not saying this to be harsh, I'm saying this because it's true. Sometimes we care about something that nobody else cares about.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we think something is important that nobody else thinks is important, and sometimes it's important and it's impactful for us because maybe we have a personal experience with it. Right? So again, that's not to say that it's not impactful. That's not to say it's not important, but we have to come out of ourselves and say, okay, this is important to me, but what is the bigger impact of that? Because that is what research is. Research is not necessarily about my individual experience, but my individual experience can fit into a bigger problem. Absolutely. But sometimes my experience is just my experience and doesn't have any level of significance for other people. Right? So I want other people in society as a whole, the nation as a whole, or even internationally. Right? So when you are figuring out your topic, right, you also want to figure out, you know, what, and that again is going to come from reading. What's the significance of whatever that thing is, or whatever that topic is, right? So maybe to use your example, Young, about maybe when you're reading about because of heightened stress, or because not feeling a sense of belonging in their communities, maybe marriages or people are engaging in divorce, maybe relationships are splitting up, maybe there's high level of stress in the relationship, right? And what are the implications of that? What does that then lead to? Does that lead to whoever that student is dropping out of their program and that family returning to their country of origin? What is the problem that creates for the U.S., right? If you have, because a lot of revenue gets generated in terms of tuition from international students. A lot of universities depend on international tuition to keep them afloat, right? So that you have to start kind of digging of what is going to be the relevance and the impact of this particular thing beyond my own silo experience. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, but I know, so because I read some literature actually, so there's some literature focused on, okay, so the well-being of the spouses actually have some impact on the academic achievement of the international. I understand that part, but I want to just focus on the spouses themselves. Like, okay, so who care about their psychological well-being, right? It's not related to the international students, but related to the person themselves, individually.
Right. So your task will be to figure out why does that matter? Right. Why does how that spouse feels or how that spouse is coping? Why is that important? And as a researcher, remember, this is not about who you are personally in your relationship, right? You're having on a researcher hat. You're in a role of a researcher, and it does require an objective look at whatever that situation might be. We have to come outside of ourselves and look at this as an objective researcher. As a researcher, why do I want to research this? Why is this important? What is it impacting? Again, what is that impact? What is that significance? So some of you might be kind of swimming around close to what your topic might be, and you haven't really landed yet. And that's okay, right? That's the purpose of this workshop, to help you start thinking about what that is. So what I suggest for students, when you're reading an article, right, and you're trying to, acquire that knowledge, at least this is what I did that was very helpful for me when I was doing my research. When I would read an article and I would, come across something that would fit within this pain category, I would literally highlight it, circle it, pain, right? And I would do that going throughout all the different articles that I read. So when I sat down to write my literature review, when I sat down to write my stuff, I just collated all of the things that I read, and I already previously had all the pains associated with what I wanted to research highlighted or categorized. So it was easier for me when I sat down to write the pain of my study. I was able to, again, collate all the things that were feeding into that part of the literature review. So when you're reading, some of you might be, I was a highlighter person. I knew anything highlighted in yellow was the pain. Anything highlighted in pink was something else. So it was easy for me to spot what areas I needed to pull from based on what I was writing about. Because you want to work smarter, not harder. Right? You don't want to go back to an article and be like, where was that again? Where did I read that? Which one was this? You don't want to be in that space, right? So when I picked up my batch of articles, or even what I had saved electronically, boom, yellow, that's pain. That's the area I'm looking for. So that's what I'm focusing on. So when you're reading, work smart. Highlight, underline, note, circle, whatever system you want to have in place. Because once you're reading studies, you'll see these types of things emerge. You're like, oh, they're talking about this. This fits into why this research is important. This fits into why it's necessary. This fits into the impact of this problem. Oh, it's talking about its implications or significance in the field. Oh, so you start seeing things kind of come off the page because you're now reading those articles with an informed perspective. You're looking for those things. You're intentionally looking for it. You're not just mindlessly reading. All right? So once you work through the pain, you can then transition to, okay, what's the scope of this problem? And the scope builds on the pain. The scope is about how is this pain manifested? So an example of what a scope of a problem might be is we look at high rates of family fragmentation. So that is just a fancy term that means like a broken home or a family that's been fragmented, or like a single parent home or divorce, however you want to look at it, right? So you can look at an example of when we have high rates of family fragmentation, right? So high rates of divorce or unwed parents or single parent homes, we know from the research, right, that the implications of that is that it results in poor health outcomes for that parent and for the children in the home. And poor health could be in terms of relational health, physical health, emotional, mental health. And we're now seeing that all these different types of health do not exist in silos, right? If I'm having relational issues, that's going to impact my mental health. That's going to impact my emotional health. If I have physical health issues, that's also going to impact my emotional health. And so I'm thinking about Yunyun's example earlier about if someone is not doing well, it has implications for them as well as the people around them. Right? So Yunyun, I'll use you as an example again. And this, again, is hypothetical. I don't know specifics about you, right? But let's just say Yunyun had a really hard day at school, is really stressed out, right? Feeling discouraged. And she comes home, right? Maybe she takes that out on her partner. Maybe she takes that out on her kids or whatever the case may be. So you start seeing now how her own well-being is impacting those around her and how that can lead to heightened stress for herself, heightened stress for the people around her. And we all know what heightened stress does to someone's physical health, right? So that's what I mean here about the scope. The scope builds on the pain. How is this pain showing up and affecting things around it? right? So here the example of poor parental alliance or involvement, generational chronic poverty. All of those things are the scope of the issue, of that pain. This is how it shows up. This is how it manifests itself. Any questions about how to think about or identify the scope of whatever problem it is that you're thinking about? All right, so pull up your worksheet again, okay? And now we're on that second block where we're going to jot down our ideas about, okay, what is the scope of the problem? So you look at that top box where you've had the pain, build on that. How does the pain show up? How does it manifest itself? And jot down some of your notes in that middle box under scope.
I have a question. So I was wondering how the difference between the pain and the scope of the problem, because I know for the pain you're looking at like what is the impact of this. So I guess I was just a little confused on maybe how they're different.
So they go together, right? Because they build on each other. So let's look an example here of the pain on the previous slide, right? So let's maybe look at chronic unemployment, right? So let's think of a family where either parent or both parents have been chronically unemployed or has experiencing long-term unemployment, right? So that is the identified pain, right? So we can talk about why is chronic unemployment important? Why is it necessary for us to fix that problem or address that problem? What's the social, national significance of that, right? All of that will fall under the pain. When you talk about the scope, right? How does chronic unemployment show up and impact on different levels? Well, not impact, but how does it show up and manifest itself in that person's life, right? So again, going back to the research, we learned from the research that chronic unemployment can lead to some of the examples that I have on there, right? Higher rates of divorce due to high financial stress or chronic financial stress. Chronic financial stress, right, or chronic marital stress can impact someone's health, in all those different areas I described before. And if those parents or if that family were to fragment or become a broken home, maybe issues then arise between the both parents, where the parenting alliance becomes strained, or maybe one parent becomes less involved. And with chronic unemployment, again, long-term unemployment, how that can lead to chronic poverty. So now I have taken that initial pain. I said, this is how it manifests itself in all of these different ways. And you're right. That's where it aligns very closely to impact. And that's why these two go together and they build on each other.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, think about all of this. And as we go through, these different sections are not existing in silos. Right? There's a thread that's going to run through them because remember, this is a story, right? This is a narrative. So it's going to flow, it's going to intertwine with other sections, right? They're all going to relate to each other. It's all part of your narrative. So take about another minute or so and wrap up some of the ideas that you have in that block, and we'll see if some of you want to share the pain. Or the scope, sorry. All right. Who wants to? And so before I go into that, my I want to make sure we have realistic expectations of ourselves and realistic expectations for this workshop. Is if you are having a hard time working through the worksheet, that's to be expected, right? But for some of you, this is the first time you're really thinking about it in this way and really trying to understand how to approach writing your literature review. So if it's challenging and it's struggling, that's expected, right? So my expectation is not that you will have beautifully communicated pains and scopes and the problems. We are trying to flush it out, right? We're trying to learn how to do that. So if it's a little bit rough, that's okay. Still share. That's why we're here. We're here to help you learn how to do this. And you won't be an expert by the time we get to the end of the workshop, but at least you have a map, a road sheet to help you continue, right? So who wants to talk to us about how they build on the pain that they identified and identify the scope or the magnitude of the problem? Who wants to share?
I can share mine. So I study oyster reef restoration, so it's a little bit of a different background. But for my scope, I wrote that declining oyster reefs negatively affect coastal communities, fisheries, and the commercial oyster dredging specifically. We have a decline in water quality, marine biodiversity, and in fisheries. And that's kind of where I got her there.
So that's a great example. And when that happens, Monisha, what are the implications of that? When it's impacting the coastal line, when it's impacting the fisheries, what happens as a result of that?
A lot of people suffer and a lot of marine ecosystems shut down.
Right? So that's important. Right? So because when you're talking about a food source, you're talking about employment, you're talking about multiple things. You see how very little I know about that field, but I know some things, right? Because I love my Shark Week. I learned so much about the ocean and all of those things. No, I'm obsessed with Shark Week. But we get to see the implications of that. And I think, what has been fascinating within that particular field, all the research that's coming out now related to how COVID has even impacted that. right? Because you have less people, particularly I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from Trinidad. So there's a lot of the beaches have been closed. A lot of things have changed, and it has affected ocean life.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
So you see how you can be thinking in a critical way that really now shows the impact and the scope of what you're looking at. So we have to zoom all the way out.
Okay.
Because the reality is the average person is not necessarily going to care about the oysters.
That's true.
But if you tell me, well, you enjoy eating oysters, right? You enjoy eating seafood. You enjoy going to the ocean. So when that is impacted, this is how it impacts all the things that you care about. Now I'm engaged. Now I'm like, oh, okay. Now I see the importance. Do you understand?
Yeah, completely. No, that made it a lot clearer. Thank you.
Yes. And maybe I have or family members that work in the fishing industry. Now you're talking in a language that is meaningful to me. So I might not care about the oyster in and of itself, but hey, if this is going to impact employment for people in my family, now I care about them.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, completely.
That really. Sorry.
Oh, that really it helps me organize it a lot better.
Yes, we have to zoom out. How is this manifesting beyond because sometimes as researchers, we can have a blinder on where we're only seeing what we see, right? And we have to expand that, right? We have to really learn, how do I come out of this and really be able to capture the depth or the magnitude, the scope of this. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Monisha. All right. So we've now, you're welcome. So now we will jump into looking at, all right, we've talked about the pain. We've talked about the scope, the magnitude, the significance. What is the specific problem that we are identifying? And that's where the gap in the research comes up, right? And guess what? Surprise, surprise, you're not going to know about the gap in the research unless you read the research, right? So again, we can't escape that reading, okay? So that's where you find out what the problem is. It might be what the gap is, right? And this is where you have to be very specific. So going back to what I said to Union earlier, what is the specific issue and problem you want to address? Spouses of F1 students, that is as broad as can be, right? What is the specific issue about that population that you want to address? You have to have a laser focus. Sometimes we try to save the world with our research, and that's not what this is about, right? You're always thinking about what slice of the pie am I going to focus on, right? So what is the specific issue or problem that you're going to address in your research, right? And then you think about what's the rationale and goal and purpose of looking at that, of studying that. So here, I actually took this word for word out of my dissertation, right, to give you an example. So I'm going to read it out loud. And as I'm reading it, I want you to be thinking about, how did I identify the problem here? How did I really set up the need and purpose for the study? What is the specific issue and problem that I wanted to address, right? So economically marginalized racial and ethnic minorities face dire consequences as a result of experiencing childhood adversity. Consequences include high rates of family fragmentation, decreased family support, ineffective parenting practices, poor adult relationship health outcomes, chronic financial stress, physical, emotional, and behavioral health issues, and early death. Contextual stressors further exacerbate adult relationship health outcomes for economically marginalized disadvantaged populations. These socioeconomic disparities highlight issues of national and societal importance, and further investigation is needed to better understand the relationship between childhood adversity and adult relationship health, as well as the specific processes that help explain this relationship for disenfranchised populations. So you see there, I highlighted what is missing in the research, what we need to have a better understanding about, the specific thing I am going to look at, and why it's important, the rationale for that. Do you see how I have done those things in that paragraph?
I think you address your pain and also scope of this topic first. Then it comes to the gap. What needs to be addressed? What needs to be understood in this topic?
Yeah. So by the time I get to this paragraph, I have already flushed out those earlier things, those earlier parts, right? Can you guys hear me? Yeah. So I've already flushed out all those different pieces. So I get to that last, delivering the bang, right? At that ending piece to kind of bring it home for the need for this study and all of the implications to highlight why it's important, that why this is something of significance. So by the time you identify your specific problem, you've already told a big part of the narrative already. So by the time the reader gets to this part of your paper, they're sold into, yeah, this is really a problem. You've already sold them. They've already bought into that. And you're kind of bringing it home with, okay, this is the specific part of the pie that I'm slicing out here. And this is why it's important. Any questions about this part? All right, so you know the drill. Get back your sheet and think about the pain flowing into the scope that's now flowing into the problem identification, and jot some notes down in that square or rectangle, whatever shape that is. All right, take one more minute and wrap up your thoughts about the problem identification. All right. Who feels comfortable, at least somewhat comfortable, sharing what they've jotted down for their problem identification section? Vadika, what about you?
So actually, I'm not there yet. I mean, I haven't really looked into the literature review much. I just started. I mean, my advisor just last week or so, we spoke about assisting in the literature review. So I'm not really there yet. So
okay,
I'm here to get some insight. That's it. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problems. I hope it's helping you so far.
Yes, ma'am, it is. Thank you.
All right. What about someone else?
Dr. Brief, I want to give someone else some chance. You know, I do not want to see look like.
It's a small group, so you don't have to give anybody else a chance. You can jump in. It's not a big group, so please jump in.
Okay, so let me see. I actually identified the pain and the scope. So the scope is like, okay, so the spouses here, they give up their professional identity, their career in, their home country and come here. So which will result a loss of professional identity and high social isolation level, poor psychological well-being, and less satisfied marriage relationship, difficulty to acculturate to the main culture here, and also affect their partner's academic achievement. Then another important thing is, so it could cause a dependent status in the power dynamic. Does it make sense? Power dynamic.
In the relationship.
Right, in the relationship. Then, so especially with the exploding of COVID-19 and the newly released administrative regulations towards international students, which eventually will impact the spouse as well. So the topic will try to have a better understanding of the impact of COVID-19 and the administrative regulations on spouses' psychological well-being.
So what is so again, we talked earlier about how you need to really tease out why we need to care about that, right? Mm-hmm. Why it's important, right? Mm-hmm. And again, when we say we, whatever population it is that you're trying to alert about this, right? So mm-hmm. is that specific policymakers? Is that the university administration saying, hey, this is what you need to know about pertaining to the international students on your campus and what's mm-hmm. happening, right? So who is the we, right? Who is the population that you're trying to ring the bell for, right? So when you think about that, again, the specific issue of what exactly that you're looking at to address, because you're still talking about multiple things, mm-hmm. right? So then, you're also now throwing in there the additional impact of COVID, the additional impact of a pandemic, right? And maybe that is the core of what you are looking at, because again, that's not the typical experience, right? So maybe you're looking at a pandemic-related study, and that's fine. You just have to make sure that you've teased it all the way out and have a strong rationale or goal for why you're doing that. What would be the purpose of looking at that? What would be the purpose of that study? And again, I have this paragraph here, and it looks fancy and it looks pretty, but it took a lot of massaging and a lot of writing to get it there. This doesn't happen overnight, right? I'm trying to go really quick through a process that takes months sometimes, right? You have to keep reading and keep revising your writing. So I want to jump forward, and so now that have a better understanding of, well, the hope is that, as you're going through your reading and as you're flushing out these different sections, you're going to have a better understanding of the specific problem or issue that you're trying to look at in your research, right? So you flushed out all of those parts. And again, you're doing that before you're even necessarily sitting down to write it out, right? You're collecting your research, you're reading, you're highlighting, you're doing all this stuff. And again, working smarter, not harder. When you read something, if it's fitting in that pain category, if it's fitting in that scope, maybe I read a lot of studies that actually helped me even put together a strong problem statement, right? So you read and you might even see some examples of, oh, I want to phrase mine similar to this. You can use as an example, right? So all those things you want to highlight so when you go back to look for it, when you start to write, you're not fishing around, right? You know exactly where you're going to look. So it's really important after you've done that process, now it is time to create an outline for your literature review. This is something I see a lot, again, with students that maybe they're not used to creating an outline. They're just maybe used to starting to write a paper. But when you're taking on a task, like writing a dissertation or a literature review, it's a big project. It's a big writing project. Like most of you have shared at the beginning, you don't even know where to start, right? So what do you think is the importance of having an outline for a project at this level, at a thesis level or dissertation level? Why is it important for you to have an outline of, let's say, your chapter 2 or your literature review? What do you think? Why do you think it's important?
Well, the outline will help give you a sense of direction of what you're going to be writing and what the main topics will be for each paragraph.
Mm-hmm. What else? Why else is it important?
It also just helps you streamline your research process, so you're not kind of just spending a lot of time reading a bunch of different papers, but you've like focused the different ideas you want to focus on.
Absolutely. I cannot tell you how many times working on my dissertation, I was like, what am I writing about again? What is this about? Like, what am I doing? Like, because, and then sometimes the document gets really big and you're scrolling up and down. Which section am I in? Where am I? Right? And it's so easy to get lost for a project of this magnitude, right? So again, I'm all about working smarter, not harder. Yes, does it take you time to flush out all the things that I just said? Yes. Is it going to take you time to sit and write an outline? Absolutely. But it saves you on the back end. Do the work on the front end, save yourself on the back end, right? So I went back and I have here on the next slide just a small part of my outline that I created for my dissertation. This, when I tell you a small part, it's a small part. I trimmed this considerably. When I was done creating my outline for chapter 2, it was 7 pages long. My outline. Did it take me time? Absolutely. But once I sat down to write, it was a breeze. Well, it was not a breeze. It was still hard, but you know what I mean. It was my time was more effectively used because I was now plugging in the details of my story. I was now plugging in the details of my narrative that was already flushed out throughout the outline. Because sometimes you can get lost in your own topic, right? And you want to make sure that the story flows. What do I need to tell the person first so they understand this, and then they understand this, and then they understand this, and then they understand this, right? It has to be sequential. So when you do an outline and a detailed outline, it helps you keep things in order. It helps you keep the sequence. Because also when you're writing a dissertation or you're reading a lot, sometimes things make a lot of sense to you that doesn't make sense to somebody else that doesn't know anything about that topic. Because you begin to assume that other people know things. Other people are not reading what you're reading, right? So you really have to flush So what helped me is thinking, okay, I'm giving my chapter 2 to somebody that doesn't know anything about this topic. So I have to explain and be clear about everything at every different level of it. And that's why the outline was that long for me. I flushed out every part of it. And then I would say, okay, which section of my story am I going to work on today? And so I'm targeting what I'm writing on. And maybe I get tired of that part of the story. I need a break from writing that section. My brain is tired. I need to jump to something else. But now you're not just recklessly jumping all over the place. You're now going to another specific part of your outline and flushing that out. So you're still not getting lost in your story. Maybe you're just moving around, but it's still flushed out all the way so you don't get lost in the narrative. So what are your thoughts looking on this very truncated version of my outline as an example? What are your thoughts looking at this? Very detailed.
It's detailed. I like how you start off broad and then you kind of narrow it down and then you bring in like your ideas on your thesis.
Absolutely. So you see that it ends with adult relationship health, right? Which is where I come in. That's the slice of the pie that I'm focusing on my research. So I've told you all of this, and then I said this is going to be the purpose of this particular study. But I've still told you about the whole shebang, right? I've given you the full story and then saying this is a part of the story that I am going to now dissect further. So it's very detailed, right? So you're starting broad and then you're funneling down to where you are positioning yourself and where you are positioning your study. So again, to go back to what I said earlier, when I started this, I already knew that I wanted to end on the implications of adult relationship health outcomes. That was going to be the end of the story, leading into what is limited in the research and what I'm going to address. That was the end. And then, okay, if for them to understand the end, what story do I need to tell to get them there? And then I flush it out that way. So be detailed in your outline. It's going to take time, yes. Time in the beginning saves you time in the end. And trust me, as someone who's gone through this process, you want the help on the back end. When you are exhausted, ready to give up, and you're tired, right? You want all of the help that you can get on the back end of things. So do the work on the front end. Okay? Have a detailed outline. So I stress this just now. Really take the time to create that outline and then go back and fill it in. Then type into that document. So my outline, my 7-page outline, then naturally turned into my chapter 2 because I then typed into my outline. Obviously, you have to format and do all the things that you need to do to have it formatted for your chapter 2. But my sections were already lined out. So my story made sense once I was done. Okay? So I know we're nearing the end of time, so I want to take a couple of minutes and maybe each of you can share one takeaway that you have from our workshop today, one thing that you learned, and then we'll have some time for questions or any comments at the end. So I'll start with you, Ashley. What is one takeaway, at least one thing that you learned?
I think definitely just your sessions on how to kind of keep clear on the scope and highlighting the different panes of the topic, the articles, kind of highlighting the different parts to help keep it a clear focus of what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think that was kind of one of the bigger takeaways for me, because that's kind of where I'm at right now, is just starting my literature review. Mm-hmm. I'm about to start chapter 2 of my dissertation, so this just helps give me some ideas of how to kickstart that.
That's great. What about you, Monisha?
Yeah, I found this really helpful in basically trying to figure out how to streamline this process. Yeah, because I've been like looking at papers and then I end up in another paper, and yeah, before I know it, I'm in a paper that's unrelated to my topic.
Yes,
so
that beautiful rabbit hole.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely a rabbit hole.
Yes.
And how, yeah, I think I will create an outline because that seems like to be a good idea to keep me on track, and being able to like write in the outline itself seems like it'll be really helpful.
Yes, it will take time, but absolutely, yes, absolutely. What about you, Vedika?
So the takeaway definitely would be the outlining part of the literature review. So yeah, I know that we do tend to get lost in our readings, so this would definitely help. Yeah.
All right. What about you, Yunyan?
I think I learned a lot, but I was very impressed with your outline. I was like, okay, 7 pages in one chapter. That's a lot. Okay, that's a lot of work to just trim out those outlines. So I'm still thinking how I'm going to trim out my paper, my literature review. Then also, I think one question you raised for me is, okay, so when you talk about this topic, these issues, then this issue rings a bell to whom? To which population? So how we address those issues to the related parties?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the key, what I learned from, and I had a really good mentor, and who I still have, that, said to me in the moment, because you feel like sometimes you're drowning in your chapter 2. And, he said to me, the more effort that you put into your chapter 2 makes writing your chapter 5 so much easier. Because now you get to discuss your story. Now you get to discuss your story based on, again, the very fleshed out story you've already told, but now you talk about it in terms of your opinions, your thoughts about what you found in your study based on that story. So the deeper understanding you have of that story, the easier it is going to be when it's time for you to actually discuss it from your own thoughts. Right? So doing the work in chapter 2 has multiple positive implications for you as you work through the process of writing your thesis and your dissertation.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. A lot of pain too, I believe so.
No, I know it can be painful, absolutely. So any questions for me? Anything that wasn't clear that you want me to clarify as we wrap up? No questions?
Just some personal questions. So if next time I come across a literature review assignment, you think I can just reach out to you for some direction?
Yeah. So I mean, what I would suggest is, use this. I don't know if we can make this PowerPoint available, Sophia. I need to send it to you. That's how you can make it available. So, use the PowerPoint to help guide you. That's why, I took those breaks in between to have you go back at every level, right in that box, Again, that's just a preliminary way to at least get you to practice. But really use that as a template to help you flush the whole thing out. And there's going to be a lot of back and forth. You're always going to be massaging that document, right? Writing, rewriting. That is just the nature of the process with that. But yeah, you can definitely reach out to me if you have any questions or anything that you want help in terms of flushing it out. Okay?
And yes, Dr. Griffith, if you send this to me, I will make it available on our website. And I've also recorded this session. So it was kind of a longer one, so it's going to take a little bit to download. And as soon as it downloads, it'll also be on the website. So if you'd rather go back and listen to all of this, that will also be available as well.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank all of you all for coming again. I hope it was helpful and you all have takeaways that's going to help you. And
yes, thank everyone so much for your time. Thank you, Dr. Griffiths. I sent the eval in the comments. If you guys could just take a couple of minutes to fill it out for me, that would be super great. I'm also going to email it. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about GROW or any workshops, definitely let me know. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Griffiths, for your time. I know you're busy and it's kind of a hectic semester. I know it's busy for everybody, but thank you again for your time, and I hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You're welcome. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.